My mother has spent 6 Christmases introducing my brother as the one running the vineyard and me as the one who works in restaurants, without ever once asking which restaurant, which is how she still doesn't know I'm the wine critic about to decide whether Larkin Vineyards survives the next 17 days. She said it again this year the way she always does mid-pour, not even looking up from the glass she was topping off for Teddy's fiancé. Teddy laughed. He always laughs, the specific laugh of a man who has never once had to wonder if the room is on his side. My name is Margot Larkin, though almost nobody who respects my work has ever heard that name. In the world that actually pays me, I'm Margot Sinclair, head sommelier at Salt and Vine in San Francisco, a title I've held for 4 years and worked 11 to earn. Sinclair was my grandmother's maiden name, the one she gave up the day she married into the Larkin named. Eventually, the Larkin way of deciding who in this family gets to matter. My mother thinks Sinclair means I carry trays. Here's what she doesn't know going into this particular crisis. Under a byline that's just initials, I'm the taster who writes the blind tasting column for the Appellation Review, the closest thing our industry has to a verdict. Anonymity isn't a family secret there, it's the entire point. A taster who can be recognized is a taster whom be courted, and I've spent 7 years making sure nobody could court me. And 6 years ago, when my grandmother Evelyn died, she left me something my mother has never once asked about, an 18% stake in Hollow Ridge Vineyard, the 11 acres up the Ridge Road that have quietly kept Larkin's flagship wine drinkable through 3 bad harvests, while half the other wineries in the valley got priced out of Hollow Ridge fruit entirely and never understood why Larkin never did. I understood why. I'd understood it since I was 26 years old, sitting in a lawyer's office being handed a folder my mother wasn't in the room for. My mother hadn't wanted to come to the reading at all, said funerals were hard enough without also sitting through paperwork, so it was just me, my father, and Teddy in that office when the lawyer got to the part about Hollow Ridge. Teddy didn't understand what he was hearing, not really. He just heard vineyard and assumed it was somehow folded into the family business he already expected to inherit. My father understood immediately. I watched it land on his face. And he didn't say a single word about it to my mother for 6 years. It's the only real secret my father has ever kept from her, and he kept it for me. Sylvia Kessler met me at the gate the week after, before I'd signed a single form, and walked me through 11 acres I'd technically co-owned for exactly 9 days. Your grandmother used to come up here on Sunday mornings, she told me, just to sit in the truck and look at the vines. Never took a single grape she didn't pay full price for. Said the friendship was worth more than the discount. I understood, standing there, that Evelyn hadn't just left me a business asset. She'd left me the one relationship in this valley that had never once required me to be anyone other than exactly who I was. My grandmother taught me to taste when I was 7, in her kitchen, holding a glass up to the window light and asking me what I smelled before I was allowed to say what I liked. Black cherry, she'd say, guiding me. Wet stone. Something like pencil shavings, if you're patient enough to find it. My mother called it a parlor trick. When I was 12 and told her I could pick our East Block fruit out of a blind lineup against the West Block, she told me that wasn't a business skill and sent me to help Teddy stack crates instead. I stacked a lot of crates. I also kept tasting quietly on my own, because some things you don't need permission to be good at. I still remember the drive out of Sonoma the day I left for culinary school, my father idling at the end of the driveway in his truck so he could happen to be there when I loaded the last box, my mother nowhere in sight, because she'd told me the night before that if I was really serious about restaurants instead of the family business, I should go find out how serious the rest of my life could get without us. I found out. It took 11 years, dozens of exams and blind tastings, one failed first attempt at my advanced sommelier certification that I never told anyone about, and more nights than I can count standing in a walk-in cooler at 2 in the morning memorizing vintage charts, but I found out. I failed that exam the first time, 4 years into this life, on the blind tasting section, calling a Vouvray a Chenin from somewhere in the New World, off by an entire hemisphere. I called my mother that night, drunk on humiliation more than anything I'd actually had to drink, and told her, and she said, well, maybe restaurants aren't really your thing after all, before asking if I'd heard back yet about coming home to help with harvest. I didn't call her the second time I sat the exam. I didn't call her when I passed either. I called Priya, who'd covered my shifts for 3 weeks so I could study, and who cried on the phone louder than I did. Teddy stayed, inherited the title of heir apparent by default and by gender, and has spent the last 3 years actually running Larkin Vineyards, a job he wanted badly enough to take before he was entirely ready for it. I found out how badly he wasn't ready for it on a Tuesday, from Priya Anand, my co-sommelier at Salt and Vine, who reads the wine trade press the way other people read horoscopes. It was 2 nights after I'd walked a food critic I recognized and didn't let on that I recognized through a bottle list request so vague, it usually sends new sommeliers into a small panic, something that feels like California but isn't trying too hard to prove it. I'd brought up a Santa Cruz Mountains Syrah from a producer most guests have never heard of, let it breathe exactly the right amount of time, and watched her face change on the second sip in the specific way I live for, the moment somebody tastes something and understands, briefly, why anyone bothers doing this at all. "This is extraordinary," she'd said. "How did you know?" I get that question maybe 4 times a night, and I've never once had a real answer that fits in a sentence a stranger wants to hear during dinner. The honest answer is that I've spent 11 years training a part of my brain my own mother has never once been curious about. I told her, instead, that the bottle just felt right for the room, and let her think it was instinct instead of a decade of very deliberate work. 2 nights later, Priya slid her laptop across the pass toward me during a slow service. "Isn't Larkin your family's place?" she asked. "Sonoma. Your maiden name, before you got weird about using it." "It's still my name, Priya. I just don't use it at work." "Sure. Well, your not name's Vineyard is apparently getting acquired. Hallcrest Beverage Group. There's a piece about it in the trade letter this morning." She tapped the screen. "Says the family's, quote, exploring strategic options, unquote, which is industry for drowning." I read it twice standing at the pass, in my black apron, holding a bottle of Pouligny Montrachet I was supposed to be decanting for table 9. Hallcrest was a roll-up outfit, the kind that bought struggling family labels, stripped the names down to a logo on a supermarket shelf, and moved on. If they were circling Larkin, it meant somebody inside my family's business had let the number get bad enough to make that call, or had been told it was that bad by someone with a reason to say so. "You're doing the face," Priya said. "What face?" "The one where you're already 3 moves ahead and haven't told your body yet." She took the bottle out of my hands before I dropped it. "Go call your brother." I didn't call my brother. I called my father instead, because my father has always been the only Larkin who picks up when I actually need something answered rather than performed. "It's not as bad as the article makes it sound," he said, which is the exact sentence my father says, right before something turns out to be worse than the article made it sound. "Teddy's got a consultant helping him look at options. Fellow named Ashby. Very sharp. Very thorough." "How thorough?" "Thorough enough that your mother's stopped asking questions about it, which you know is either a very good sign or a very bad one." I knew which one it was, I just didn't have proof yet. I drove up to Sonoma that weekend, the way I do maybe 6 times a year, mostly for my father's sake. My mother was in the kitchen when I arrived, the same kitchen she's run for 30 years, and she looked at my hands before she looked at my face, the way she always does, checking for something she's never once found. "You didn't bring wine," she said. "I brought a bottle of the Pouligny we're pouring by the glass right now. It's in the car." "I meant something from here. From us." She turned back to the stove. "It would be nice, once, if you cared enough to bring something that actually mattered to this family." Bree, Teddy's fiancée, gave me a hug that lasted a half-second longer than the ones my own mother gives, which I've come to understand is Bree's way of apologizing for a family she married into but didn't build. "I love what you do," she'd told me once the first time we met, before anyone had corrected her. Somebody must have corrected her since, because she's never said it again, though the hug always lasts that extra half-second, like an apology she doesn't have the words for. Teddy came in a few minutes later, sunburned across the back of his neck, talking before he'd finished taking his boots off, the way he does when he's nervous and doesn't want anyone to notice. Ashby was with him, a compact, tan man in a quarter-zip who shook my hand a half-second too firmly and said, "So you're the sister in the city," like it was a category he'd already filed me under. "Margot." Right, Teddy mentions you." He didn't say what Teddy mentioned. I got the sense it wasn't much. Over dinner, Ashby laid out the numbers with a confidence that would have been impressive if I hadn't spent 11 years learning to recognize the specific tone men use when they're certain nobody at the table can check their math. Hallcrest's offer was $4.1 million for the estate, the label, the equipment, everything. He called it generous, given the current state of the vineyards, his word fundamentals. The Hollow Ridge fruit alone accounts for a third of what makes the reserve wine what it is, I said. Did that factor into the valuation? Ashby smiled at me the way people smile at a question they've decided not to fully answer. We factored in the existing supplier agreement, sure. Standard stuff. Nothing exotic there. It's not a standard agreement, I said. Hollow Ridge cut off 4 other wineries in this valley in the last 6 years. Larkin's the only one still getting fruit. Loyalty, Ashby said. Old relationships. Sentimental, but it doesn't really move a valuation. My mother set down her fork. You pour it, Margot. Teddy grows it. There's a difference, and I don't think tonight's the night to pretend there isn't. Nobody at that table asked me how I knew what Hollow Ridge had done for the last 6 years. Nobody ever asks me how I know anything. I've stopped being surprised by it. I've just never quite stopped it costing something. I used to think my mother's favoritism was simple, the old story, son inherits, daughter decorates. It's not quite that simple. Her own father sold the family's original 10 acres out from under her when she was 23, the ones she'd worked since childhood, because he didn't think a woman could hold a winery together through a bad decade, and gave the proceeds to her older brother to start something else entirely. She has spent 36 years building something she could never lose the same way, and somewhere in that project, she convinced herself the only way to keep a vineyard safe was to make sure a son's name was on the deed. I don't think she ever noticed she was doing to me exactly what was done to her. I don't think she'd survive noticing it, which might be the actual reason she never has. Teddy caught me alone for a minute later that night, out by the crush pad, both of us pretending to check on equipment neither of us needed to check on. You don't have to like Ashby, he said. I don't totally like Ashby, but I don't know what else to do, Margot. The number the bank gave us wasn't good, and he's the only one who came in with an actual plan instead of just telling me to figure it out myself. What if his plan is wrong? Then I guess I find that out the same way I find out everything else about running this place. The hard way, in front of everyone, 3 years too late to unlearn it. He almost smiled. At least you gotta leave before you had to find any of that out. I didn't tell him leaving hadn't felt like getting away with anything. I don't think he'd have believed me, and honestly, I wasn't sure I believed it myself, not entirely, not that night. I tried my father alone, the next morning before I drove back to the city. He was out checking the East Block irrigation lines, the same block I used to taste blind before I could legally drink, and he let me walk the rows with him the way he has since I was small enough to need him to slow down. Dad, I need you to actually look at the Hollow Ridge numbers in whatever Ashby's putting together, not read his summary, the actual underlying assumptions. I trust Teddy on this, Margot. I'm not asking you to not trust Teddy, I'm asking you to check one thing. My father has spent 35 years being a very good winemaker and an extremely conflict-averse husband, and I have never once, in my entire life, seen those two facts sit comfortably in the same room. He looked at the vines instead of at me. Your mother's decided this is Teddy's to handle. I'm not going to be the one who undermines that, not with everything else going on. Even if the numbers are wrong? Are you sure they're wrong, or are you sure you'd know better than Ashby if they were? He said it gently. He always says everything gently, which is its own kind of surrender. I'm not trying to hurt you. I just can't fight 2 wars in this family at once. I drove back to San Francisco that afternoon having learned exactly one useful thing, which is that I wasn't going to get permission before I got proof. He called me that night after I'd made it back to the city, and didn't mention the vineyard at all. Your grandmother would be proud of the wine list you built out there, he said, out of nowhere. I looked it up once. Salt and Vine. Good list. It was the closest thing to I believe you that my father has ever managed to say out loud, and I understood, even then, that it was going to have to be enough. The blind flight from my Appellation Review column that month included 14 Sonoma reserves, no labels, just numbered glasses lined up under the tasting room's north light. I taste blind the same way every time, the way my grandmother drilled into me before I was old enough to understand why it mattered. Color first, held up to the light, then the nose 3 passes, eyes closed on the 3rd. Then the palate, and only then, once I've written everything down, do I let myself think about what I already suspect the glass might be. Glass 11 stopped me before I'd even finished the pour. Black cherry first, the way it always is with that fruit. Then wet stone underneath, the specific minerality that only shows up when a wine's got real Hollow Ridge fruit in the blend and not just a rumor of it. Then if you waited, if you were patient the way my grandmother taught me to be patient, something like pencil shavings, right at the back of it. I didn't need to see the label to know whose wine was in glass 11. I'd known that flavor since I was 7 years old, standing on a kitchen stool, being handed a glass I was too young to actually drink. I wrote the review the way I write every review, blind to the bottle and honest about what was in the glass. 94 points. A sentence about structure that would have made my grandmother, who taught me the word structure before I understood what it meant in a wine, genuinely proud. I filed it 2 days before Ashby's numbers said the vineyard was worth $4.1 million, without knowing yet that the two documents were about to collide. That night I did something I don't usually let myself do, which is go looking for a reason to be angry on purpose. I pulled Hallcrest Beverage Group's public filings. I pulled the last 3 acquisitions they'd closed, all family labels, all quietly delisted from Hollow Ridge's supplier roles within a year of the sale, which told me Hallcrest's own playbook didn't value Hollow Ridge fruit either, or didn't want to pay what keeping it would cost. And buried in a disclosure filing from Hallcrest's last acquisition, a name I recognized from dinner 2 nights earlier, listed as an independent consultant retained by the seller, with a success fee contingent on the deal closing. Grant Ashby had done this before. He'd been paid, both times, by the same company he was supposedly helping the family negotiate against. I called Priya at midnight, because she's the only person I know who'll pick up at midnight and immediately understand why. "Let me guess," she said, not even bothering with hello. "The not family emergency is now a family emergency." Ashby's done this before. Twice, same fee structure both times, contingent on the deal closing, and both times the vineyard lost its best supplier contract within a year of getting sold. Sell them. They don't know I taste, they don't know I write. They think I fold napkins for a living, Priya. Then tell them that too. I could hear her pouring something on her end of the line, the particular clink of her ancient corkscrew. "You've been protecting that family's ability to think of you as small for 11 years, Margot. At some point that stops being generous and starts being a service you're providing them for free. It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. You're just allergic to simple, because simple would mean admitting how long you've let this go on." She was quiet for a second. "For what it's worth, I've tasted your reviews before I knew you wrote them. Glass 11, this month. I'd have known it was you blind if I'd been paying attention to nothing but the writing. That's either the nicest or the most alarming thing you've ever said to me." "Both. Go save the vineyard, Sinclair. Or Larkin, whichever one shows up." The call from my mother came 4 days later, tighter than usual. "Ashby says we need to decide by the 15th, she said. "Before crush starts, he says waiting past that spooks the buyer." 17 days. I did the math without meaning to, the way I do math on everything now, an old habit that used to get me sent to stack crates. "Mom, I need you to hold off signing anything until I can look at the numbers myself." You. Not cruel exactly, just genuinely honestly confused, which was somehow worse. "Margot, you sell wine to strangers for a living, you don't run a vineyard. Leave the business decisions to people who understand them." "I understand wine better than anyone Ashby's put in front of you." "You understand pouring it." Her voice had that particular brightness she gets when she thinks she's being patient with someone who doesn't know better. There's no shame in that. "But this is Teddy's to handle, and my job is to support him doing it, the way I'd hope you'd support your own brother instead of second-guessing him from the city." Something in me that had been absorbing versions of that sentence for 20 years finally, quietly, stopped absorbing it. "Hold off until the 15th, I said. "That's all I'm asking. 3 more days." "We'll see," my mother said, which in 30 years I have never once heard her mean. I sat in my apartment for a long time after that call, a glass of something I wasn't really tasting going warm on the counter, doing the thing I do instead of crying, which is running back through every version of this conversation I've had with her since I was 12, looking for the exact sentence where it could have gone differently. I never find it. I've looked for over 20 years. Some conversations don't have a different version, they just have a version where you finally stop hoping for one. Grant Ashby did not think about that phone call at all, because he hadn't been on it. He was at that exact hour on a different call, with Marcus Doyle, Hallcrest's Regional Acquisitions Director, confirming that the Larkin family was still on track to sign by the 15th. "The kid's solid," Ashby said, meaning Teddy, meaning the version of Teddy who deferred to him on every number without asking where the number came from. Mom's the only wild card, and she does whatever the kid tells her, so we're fine. And the sister? Sommelier somewhere in the city, pours wine for a living. Not a factor. Ashby hadn't looked into it any further than that, because looking further would have meant admitting a hospitality worker might know something about wine that he didn't, and admitting that had simply never occurred to him, in 11 years of doing this exact job to 11 other families who'd trusted him the same way. His fee on this one, contingent on close, was $240,000. He'd already told his ex-wife about the boat. He hung up and did not think about Margot Larkin again, which was, in its own small way, the entire reason the deal was about to go wrong. I spent the next 2 days doing the two things I actually know how to do. I called my editor at the Appellation Review and asked her to move Glass 11's publication up from the usual monthly cycle to the digital edition, which could run in 48 hours instead of 3 weeks. I didn't tell her why. I've never once had to explain myself to her, which is a kind of respect I have never gotten anywhere else in my life. Then I called Hollow Ridge. Sylvia Kessler had known my grandmother for 40 years before she knew me at all, and she picked up on the second ring the way she always does, like she's been expecting exactly this call since Evelyn died. Ashby's people called us too, she said before I'd finished saying hello. Wanted to know if the Larkin allocation was, quote, transferable to new ownership. I told them I'd need to speak with my partner first. That's me. I know that's you, Margot. I've known that's you for 6 years. I could hear the smile in it. I told them I'd get back to them after the 15th. Figured that might matter to somebody. It matters? Your grandmother would have made that same call and made it faster. A pause warmer than the words. Go do what you need to do. The fruit's not going anywhere without your signature on it too. The plan had 48 hours built into it. It got about 6. Teddy called me the next morning, which he has not done, unprompted, in longer than I can accurately remember. Ashby moved the signing up, he said, fast, the words running together. Says Hallcrest's getting nervous about some rumor in the trade press, wants to close today instead of the 15th. Mom's already got the papers on the kitchen table. Margot, I don't know why I'm calling you, He stopped. I don't know if we're doing the right thing. Don't sign anything until I get there. That's not really up to me. It's Mom's signature that matters and Ashby's already. Teddy, don't let her sign it. I grabbed my keys, my laptop, the folder of Hallcrest filings I'd printed 2 nights earlier for exactly this reason, and drove north out of the city with my phone propped against the dash, refreshing the Appellation Review's site every few miles to make sure Glass 11 had actually gone live. Because if it hadn't, I was about to walk into with nothing but a family grudge and a hospitality degree nobody in it had ever taken seriously. 40 minutes of highway gave me plenty of time to rehearse how I'd say it, and every version I ran through sounded either too angry or too rehearsed, until I gave up trying to find the right words entirely and decided I'd just say the true ones, in whatever order they came out, and let that be enough for once. It had never occurred to me, in 11 years of building a life specifically so I wouldn't need this family's approval, that I'd end up needing their attention instead, urgently for reasons that had nothing to do with wanting to be seen, and everything to do with not letting them lose a business my grandmother spent 40 years building, because nobody in that kitchen had bothered to ask the one person who actually knew what was in the bottle. Every car in the family was in the driveway when I got there, plus one I didn't recognize, black, rented, the kind of car a man drives when the company is paying for it. Through the kitchen window I could see my mother at the table, pen already in her hand, Ashby beside her with a folder open to a signature line, Teddy standing by the counter with his arms crossed like he was trying to hold himself together with them. Don't sign it. 3 words from the doorway, loud enough that my mother's pen actually stopped moving. Margot? She looked up, and for one unguarded second, before she remembered who she'd decided I was, there was real confusion on her face instead of the usual mild dismissal. What are you doing here? Saving you $4 million if you'll give me 10 minutes before you sign anything. I came into the kitchen. Ashby's easy smile had gone very still. Grant Ashby's fee on this deal is $240,000, contingent on close, paid by Hallcrest, the same company he's supposedly helping you negotiate against. He's done this exact thing to 2 other families in the last 4 years. Both deals closed. Both vineyards lost their best supplier contracts within a year, the same way this one's about to. That's a serious accusation, Ashby said, recovering fast, the way men like him always do. It's a public filing, I said. Hallcrest's own disclosure from their last acquisition. I have it on my phone if anyone wants to see it before they sign anything else today. Ashby actually reached for his own folder, flipping through pages like he might find a rebuttal in it and didn't. There wasn't one. He'd never expected to need one, because he'd never expected anyone in this kitchen to know where to look. My mother looked at the folder in front of her like it had changed shape. And the valuation's wrong for a second reason, I said. It doesn't account for Hollow Ridge because Hollow Ridge isn't a standard supplier agreement, and Grant never once asked why. 18% of that vineyard belongs to me. Has for 6 years, since Grandma Evelyn's will. Sylvia Kessler isn't transferring the Larkin allocation to Hallcrest, or to anyone without my signature, and I'm not giving it. The kitchen had gone very quiet. Teddy uncrossed his arms slowly. You own part of Hollow Ridge? I've owned part of Hollow Ridge since I was 26 years old. It's the reason we're the only winery left in this valley still getting that fruit, and none of you ever once asked why, because you'd already decided the answer couldn't involve me. That's not possible, my mother said, but it came out smaller than she meant it to. It's possible, my father said quietly from where he'd come to stand in the doorway. I've known since the reading, Diane. 6 years. My mother turned to look at him like he was a stranger too, which in that moment, in that kitchen, he almost was. There's more, I said, and this was the part I'd never planned to say out loud in this kitchen, not like this. The Appellation Review published its Sonoma Reserve column 2 hours ago. 94 points for Larkin's flagship, the highest score in the region this year. I wrote it. I've been the anonymous critic for that column for 7 years. I tasted your wine blind, the way I taste everything, and it was the best thing in the flight, before I knew whose bottle I was holding, because I'd know that fruit with my eyes closed. I've known it since I was 7. My mother sat down, not gracefully, she just sat, the pen still in her hand, staring at me like she was seeing the outline of a person who'd apparently been standing in this kitchen for 30 years without her ever once looking directly at her. You pour it, Margot, she said very quietly, echoing herself from 4 nights earlier, and this time it didn't sound like an insult. It sounded like a question she didn't have an answer to anymore. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, and for once in my life, it didn't sound rhetorical. It sounded like she actually wanted to know. Because I did, once. I was 12, standing in this kitchen, telling you I could taste the difference between our blocks blind, and you told me that wasn't a business skill and sent me to stack crates with Teddy. My voice didn't shake, which surprised me more than it should have. I stopped telling you things after that, not because I stopped being good at them, because I got tired of handing you proof and watching you set it down without looking at it. Teddy looked at me for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that looked less like shame and more like relief, the particular relief of a man who has been asked to carry something alone for 3 years and has just been told he doesn't have to anymore. I knew something was wrong with his numbers, he said quietly. I just didn't trust myself enough to say so. I kept thinking Margot would know. I just never let myself call you and find out I was right. Bree, who'd been standing in the hallway the whole time, arms wrapped around herself, finally spoke. I told you I loved what you did, she said to me, quiet, like she'd been waiting years for permission to finish the sentence properly. Nobody ever let me finish it before. Ashby tried one more time, low and fast, the tone of a man calculating an exit. Mrs. Larkin, you have to understand the market conditions. Get out of my kitchen, Grant. My father's voice, quieter than I'd ever heard it and somehow the loudest thing in the room. Get out of my kitchen, and don't call this house again. Hallcrest withdrew its offer within the week, once its own compliance office got a copy of the Appellation Review byline confirmation, and the pattern in Ashby's last 3 filings from a lawyer my father hired that same afternoon. Ashby's other consulting clients in the valley started calling around within days, the way word does in an industry that small. He didn't get the boat. Larkin Vineyards refinanced the loan instead, on considerably better terms than $4.1 million would have offered, backed by a 94-point score and a supplier relationship the bank's own appraiser now understood the actual value of. Teddy still runs it. He calls me now before he makes any decision larger than a few $1,000s, not because he has to, but because he finally wants to. Bree told me at their wedding the following spring that Teddy keeps a printed copy of the Glass 11 review in his desk drawer at the winery office, not framed, not just there, the way you keep something you need to be able to touch on a bad day. My mother has not become a different woman. I don't think people become different women at 59 because they were wrong once in their own kitchen. But she stopped introducing me as anything at all for a while, which from Diane Larkin, I've learned to take as its own kind of ceasefire. Then, 3 months later, she called me the morning my column ran, just to say she'd read it, all of it, the whole issue, and that Grandma Evelyn would have liked knowing I'd learned to write about wine as well as I'd learned to taste it. She didn't apologize, I didn't ask her to. Some things you let a person come to on their own time. 6 months after that afternoon in the kitchen, the Appellation Review ran a small profile on its longtime blind critic, the first time in 7 years I'd agreed to let my name attach to any of it. My mother came to the reception in the city, in a dress she doesn't wear to family things, and stood near the back of the room while 3 winemakers I'd scored over the years came up to thank me for reviews that had, in their words, changed how buyers looked at their labels. I watched her listen to all of it. I watched her do the math on 7 years of columns she'd probably skimmed past in trade publications without knowing whose sentences they were. Afterward, in the parking garage, she didn't say much. She just asked, quietly, if I'd send her the list of every winery I'd ever reviewed from our valley, because she wanted to read them all properly, from the beginning. Priya made me tell her the whole kitchen scene twice, once for the facts and once, a week later over a bottle we weren't supposed to be drinking on shift, for how it actually felt. So the mic drop moment, she said, how'd it feel actually, not the version you tell people? Terrifying. For about 4 seconds, before it felt like exhaling for the first time in 11 years, I turned the glass in my hand, watching the legs run down the side, an old habit I'll never fully retire. I kept waiting to feel like I'd won something. Mostly I just felt like I'd finally stopped losing. Same thing from where I'm sitting. Not quite, but close enough that I'll take it. These days, when I bring a bottle to my parents' table, my father asks what I taste before I've even finished pouring. My mother still doesn't always ask. But last month she poured herself a glass before she poured one for Teddy, tasted it slowly, actually tasted it, and admitted, almost to herself, that she could pick out the pencil shavings if she was patient enough to find them. I taught her that word. My grandmother taught it to me first. Sometimes when I'm home I catch my mother watching me work a cork out of a bottle, the same way she used to watch me as a child, except the expression's different now, less checking for something she's never found. More like she's finally looking for something she's afraid she missed the first 19 years she had to look. I still work under a different name most places I go. I've just stopped needing my family to be the ones who use it. Did she go far enough, or was she still too merciful? Comment justice if the ending was perfect. Comment harder if you wanted an even colder revenge. Your comments decide how ruthless the next ending should be. Like and subscribe if you want to be here for the next story.